The gavel cracked through the air like the first strike on fresh concrete. "Judgment is entered in favor of the petitioner," the judge announced, his voice echoing off the paneled walls of the Superior Court of New York County. My company, my life's work, was now hers. Across the aisle, Vanessa smiled with practiced fragility, one hand trembling around a silk handkerchief while cameras clicked from the gallery seats. Her lawyer, the kind who billed in heartbeats, whispered something into her ear that made her lips curve upward, slow and poisonous. I didn't flinch. I just straightened my tie and fixed my gaze on the bench. The court clerk read the summary judgment: all controlling interest in Cole Foundations Incorporated, including assets, patents, and trademarks, to be transferred to Mrs. Vanessa Cole effective immediately. There it was, 13 years of building reduced to a single paragraph. The reporters scribbled. I could almost hear headlines forming. Tycoon loses empire to ex-wife in record divorce settlement. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Cole, do you have any objection?" I rose slowly, buttoned my jacket, and said the line that would end up printed in half the morning papers: "No objection, Your Honor." Concrete cracks under pressure, people shouldn't. A few laughed nervously. Vanessa's smile faltered just a millimeter, the first fracture in her victory mask. Outside, the courthouse steps were a circus. Microphones shoved forward, flashes firing like lightning. Someone shouted, "Mr. Cole, what's next for you now that you've lost your empire?" I paused, met the reporter's lens head-on, and said quietly, "I build things. I don't stop just because someone thinks the foundation's gone." It was true then, truer later. They thought it was bravado. I knew it was blueprint. Back inside my car, the noise melted away. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady, calm. The calm wasn't peace, it was containment. Years in construction teach you that emotion, like wet cement, has to set before you can shape it. Marcus, my assistant, sat beside me pale as drywall. "Boss, are you okay?" "Fine," I said. "They took everything." "Not everything." I looked out the window at the skyline I'd helped build, steel ribs against the gray afternoon. "They took a name." He frowned. "And the assets, the clients, the patents, names," I repeated softly. "Nothing but labels on paperwork." He didn't understand. No one did yet. That was the point. Weeks before the trial, I'd spent sleepless nights reviewing every clause of our corporate charter. Vanessa had hired a team of financial assassins, smart, relentless, hungry for blood and billable hours. They thought they'd cornered me. But while they were mapping the walls, I'd already poured a second foundation beneath the surface. A contract filed quietly in Delaware 8 months earlier, CF Holdings LLC. A wholly owned subsidiary with exclusive rights to every proprietary design, patent, and project pipeline Cole Foundations had ever developed. It sat there invisible, legal, untouchable. Vanessa would inherit an empty shell, a company name stripped of its heartbeat. The irony made me almost smile in court when the gavel fell. Later that afternoon, I drove to the now former headquarters. The lobby still smelled of concrete dust and fresh paint. Workers were already replacing signage, hanging new brass letters, Vanessa Cole Foundations. She'd scheduled a press conference for that evening, of course. Cameras would catch her first triumphant speech as CEO of her empire. I stood at the back unseen as crews tested the lights. The stage looked familiar, polished oak podium, the company crest gleaming under spotlights. I had chosen every detail when we built this building together. Now it felt like watching someone redecorate a mausoleum. At exactly 6:30, Vanessa appeared, dressed in a white suit that probably cost more than a site foreman's monthly pay. She smiled for the flashbulbs, hands folded, expression saintly. "I want to thank everyone who believed in me," she began. "Today marks a new era for this company, an era led by vision, transparency, and innovation." Applause. Questions. The performance of a lifetime. When she said, Cole Foundations has always stood for integrity, I almost laughed. Marcus, beside me in the shadows, whispered, she really believes she owns it all, doesn't she? She owns the frame, I murmured. Not the structure. The next morning, headlines blared her glory. Vanessa Cole takes the helm. From wife to titan. And beneath those headlines, deep in the legal notices that nobody reads, was a small, dry paragraph filed at 4:02 a.m. CF Holdings LLC hereby assumes all intellectual property and contractual obligations formerly under Cole Foundations Incorporated. No photos. No quotes. Just ink. The quiet paperwork of revenge. That night, as I sat alone in my office, my new office, a smaller space leased under CF Holdings, I replayed the day in my head. Her smile. My silence. The gavel. Every betrayal has its architecture. Hers was public. Mine was structural. And in the stillness, I whispered to the empty room, you took my company, Vanessa. You just didn't read the second contract. By morning, my phone was vibrating like a generator. Every network wanted a quote, every investor wanted reassurance. And every stranger with an opinion wanted to tell me how it felt to lose everything. I didn't answer any of them. Let them chase noise. I dealt in structure, not sound. The news cycle had already turned my silence into myth. The stoic tycoon. The man who didn't blink. They said I looked like marble when the gavel hit, cold, unbreakable. What they didn't know was that I had already broken months before, in private, in silence. In ways that left no visible cracks. It began with a dinner party, one of those high-end, art gallery affairs where everything smells faintly of white wine and self-importance. Vanessa loved those nights. They fed her. That evening, I had just landed a new federal infrastructure contract worth 8 figures, a milestone that could have cemented our company for the next decade. She wore red, sharp, deliberate. The kind of red that announces victory before the war. Halfway through the night, I overheard her laughing with one of the investors, the kind who mistook arrogance for charm. He said something about playing her cards right. She replied, I always do. Then she added, almost teasingly, Adrian builds. I manage. The table laughed. I smiled from across the room, pretending I hadn't heard. But that night, for the first time, I saw it, the quiet disgust behind her admiration. The way she looked at me not as a partner, but as a stepping stone she was tired of standing on. That's when the idea began to form. 2 weeks later, I was in Delaware, the kind of trip no one pays attention to because it sounds like business. It was business, but not the kind anyone suspected. I met with my attorney, Miller, an old friend from my early contracting days. We sat in a dim office above a bank, papers spread out like blueprints. I want a new entity, I said. Another branch, he asked. No. A vault. He leaned back, understanding dawning slowly. You're expecting a storm. I'm building for it, I said. He gave a small, wary smile. You're sure this is legal? Every bolt in place, I replied. I'm not stealing. I'm preserving. That's how CF Holdings LLC was born, a company under my sole ownership, created quietly to hold every patent, formula, and client pipeline that mattered. Cole Foundations, the public face, would stay busy with contracts, but every new design, every innovative mix or formula for concrete reinforcement, every proprietary structural model would be licensed from CF Holdings. In simple terms, Vanessa could win the house, but the ground beneath it would still belong to me. Of course. She had no idea. Not then. In the months leading up to the divorce, she grew bolder. She started showing up late to meetings, speaking over me in front of board members, taking quiet credit for projects she hadn't touched. At first, I thought it was ego. Later, I realized it was preparation, a narrative she was building for court. The visionary wife, the woman who revived her husband's outdated empire. It would have worked, too, if I hadn't seen the signs early. I remember the night I found the email, an internal draft she accidentally sent to my assistant instead of her lawyer. The subject line read, "Proposal for Asset Reallocation Strategy Discussion." I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. I already knew. That night, I poured myself a glass of scotch, walked into the half-finished penthouse we were designing together, and stared out at the city. Below me, the streets looked like a circuit board, every light a pulse, every car a moving signal. I whispered to no one, "You want a war in daylight? Fine. But I'm building mine underground." Back in the present, my phone buzzed again, this time from Omar, the company's longtime CFO. Loyal, methodical, cautious. "Adrian. We need to talk," he said. "Vanessa's PR team is rolling out a media blitz. They're claiming full ownership of our federal project pipeline." "Let them," I said. "Let them?" "Adrian, that contract is it's worth the same tomorrow," I interrupted. "CF Holdings holds the intellectual rights. She can't execute a single design without violating the licensing terms." Silence. Then a low chuckle. "You've already played the second move, haven't you?" "More like the foundation pour," I said. He laughed again. "You're colder than the concrete you pour." "Concrete's not cold," I said. "It just knows how to set." That night, the press conference played on every network. Vanessa sat under a wall of gold logos, cameras flashing. She wore that same red. A reporter asked, "Mrs. Cole, what's your first act as the new CEO of Cole Foundations?" Without missing a beat, she said, "Rebranding. We're renaming the company. Cole no longer represents just one person, it represents innovation." I watched, sipping my drink. Rebranding. Of course she would. She was about to find out what happens when you paint over wet cement. By midnight, my inbox filled with confused messages from suppliers and partners. They'd all received identical emails from Vanessa's office claiming updated ownership. I replied once to each, "Please review your contract. All active agreements are through CF Holdings LLC." By dawn, my phone started ringing again, this time with a different tone. Vanessa's lawyer called first. Then her COO. Then her PR consultant. All of them asking the same question, "What is CF Holdings?" I answered each the same way. "Just the foundation under your feet." At 9 a.m. Vanessa finally called me herself. "You think you're clever," she said, her voice sharp. "No," I said evenly. "Just thorough. You can't do this." "I didn't do anything," I said. "You signed the same public filings as I did. You just didn't read the attachments. You hid them." "I built them," I corrected. "That's what I do." She was quiet for a long time. Then, coldly, "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But at least I'll regret it with integrity." I hung up. For the first time since the gavel fell, I let myself smile. Not wide. Not smug. Just quiet satisfaction. Because in construction, as in life, the first collapse always looks like the end, until you remember the foundation never moved. By Monday morning, the story had mutated. Cable news anchors used words like betrayal, collapse, empire. Stock bloggers dissected screenshots of the divorce decree as if it were scripture. Everyone wanted to see the great Adrian Cole finally break. I didn't. I sat at my kitchen counter, black coffee cooling beside my tablet, scrolling through headlines the way an engineer checks weather before a pour. You can't fight the storm, you just calculate the wind load. At 8:30 my attorney, Miller, called. "She's everywhere," he said. "Talk shows, podcasts, morning news. Says she's relaunching the company as Cole Reimagined. Good for her." He hesitated. "You sound disturbingly calm." "Calm is cheaper than litigation." By 10 o'clock, Omar burst into my temporary office carrying a stack of printouts. "Investors are nervous," he said. "Half the partners want confirmation that their contracts are still valid." "They are," I said, signing a document without looking up. He slapped a newspaper on the desk. "Vanessa Cole promises new era." "Adrian, optics matter," he said. "People think she won." "She won the spotlight," I said. "Let her pay the electricity bill." He laughed despite himself. "You already moved the federal project money?" "Last week," I said. "Transferred under CF Holdings escrow. Every invoice routes through us. She'll realize it the moment her accounts bounce." At noon, my phone lit with a new number, one I recognized anyway. "Adrian," Vanessa said. "Sugar over glass, the Department of Infrastructure just contacted me. They're claiming our design license expired." "Did it?" "They said CF Holdings never renewed the rights." "That's strange," I said. "Because CF Holdings holds them exclusively." A pause long enough to measure in heartbeats. "You can't seriously be that petty." "Petty would be deleting the files," I said. "I kept them safe." She exhaled hard. "You're going to ruin us both." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just teaching you what foundations are for." By evening, the internet was divided, half calling me a genius for my courtroom composure, half calling me a fool for losing everything to a woman with better PR. They didn't know there were two companies, one visible, one structural. That night I went for a walk through the city. Rain slicked the streets, turning the sidewalks into mirrors. Across from Bryant Park, a new skyscraper rose from the fog, one of mine, though my name had been scraped off the cornerstone last week. I ran my hand along the cold marble where the plaque had been. Vanessa Cole Foundations, it now red and gleaming gold. People think gold lasts forever. It doesn't. It tarnishes faster than steel. 3 months earlier, Vanessa and I sat across from each other at a private lunch. She was unusually cordial, asking about project timelines. Smiling too often. "I think we should modernize our branding," she'd said. "Make it feel less masculine." "You mean less honest?" I replied. She laughed lightly. "You always think in materials, Adrian." "I think in perception." That was her tell, the shift from we to I. Every sentence from then on began with it. That lunch ended with her saying, "Sometimes you build too slow. The world moves faster than concrete sets." I'd smiled and said, "Only if you forget to reinforce it." She never caught the warning. Back to the present. The next morning, Vanessa's team announced a grand innovation summit to showcase her new leadership. Invitations went to every investor and city official she could charm. Cameras, banners, fireworks, theatrical overkill. Omar stared at the press release and muttered, "She's lighting a match on wet cement." I nodded. "Let her. We'll keep the sprinklers ready." 2 days later, the summit began inside the atrium I'd designed myself, 20 floors of glass and steel shaped like an open hand. Vanessa stood beneath a massive LED sign that read Cole Reimagined. I watched the live stream from my office, sound muted. Behind her podium, I noticed something curious. The blueprints she displayed on the screen still bore CF Holdings' digital watermark. She was presenting my patented load distribution system, the one she had no right to use. Omar caught it too. "She just broadcast your IP to 200 investors." I leaned back. "Perfect. That's public record now." He blinked. "You planned this?" "Not planned," I said. "Predicted." An hour later, I sent a short email to our legal department, subject, "Unauthorized display of proprietary material action, file cease and desist against Cole Reimagined. Attach summit screenshots as evidence." By sunset, the letter was on every business blog. Adrian Cole strikes back. The second contract emerges. The same journalists who'd crowned Vanessa Queen of Reinvention now circled her like vultures. Investors demanded answers. Her PR chief resigned within 48 hours. 3 nights later, Omar and I sat on the roof of the new project site watching cranes move under moonlight. He handed me a beer. "She underestimated you." "No," I said. "She measured me wrong. There's a difference." He looked over the skyline. "You think she'll recover?" "Everyone recovers," I said. "But not everyone rebuilds right." At home, I turned off the news and sat in silence. For months I'd lived inside blueprints of revenge, every clause, every signature calculated to the millimeter. Now, for the first time, I felt the hollowness beneath it. Winning quietly is still lonely. I picked up the framed photo on my desk, the first foundation pour of our company 15 years ago. She stood beside me then, boots muddy, eyes full of belief. We'd promised to build something that lasted. I traced a finger across the glass. "We did," I whispered. "Just not together." The following week, the headlines flipped like a switch. The same reporters who once worshipped Vanessa now tore her apart piece by piece. Cole Reimagine faces legal dispute over patents, government contracts suspended pending ownership clarification. Vanessa Cole silent amid accusations of misrepresentation. The press didn't care about truth, they cared about blood. And she was bleeding in the water. I watched from my office window as a delivery truck pulled up to the construction site below. Workers in bright vests shouted to each other, moving steel beams like choreography. They didn't care who owned the company name. They just wanted to build. For a moment, I envied them. By Tuesday, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Clients, investors, lawyers, everyone wanted to know what the hell was happening. Omar sat at my desk flipping through legal documents while I fielded questions with the patience of a man pouring concrete one slow bucket at a time. "She's calling it a misunderstanding," he said. "Claims her legal team misinterpreted the intellectual property clauses." Classic. She's blaming her lawyers, the board, even the interns. "That's the problem with weak foundations," I said quietly. "They shift under pressure." That night, I met Miller at our usual spot, a quiet bar near 57th, the kind of place where deals are made in whispers. He slid a folder across the table. "She's filed a countersuit," he said. "Claims CF Holdings was created to defraud her during the divorce." I opened the folder, scanning the pages. "That's cute. She's got nothing substantial," he continued, "but she's loud. And in corporate law, volume can hurt reputation even if it doesn't touch legality." "She's fighting shadows," I said. Miller looked at me for a long moment. "You realize you could end this now. One call. One settlement. She walks away humiliated but alive. No need to keep twisting the knife." I met his gaze. "You ever poured a foundation in winter, Miller?" He frowned. "Can't say I have." "You don't stop halfway," I said. "If you do, it cracks when the thaw comes." He sighed. "Just remember, revenge has lousy insulation. It keeps you cold long after the job's done." By Thursday, Cole Reimagine had lost 3 major investors. The government contract was officially frozen pending investigation. Suppliers began pulling out, citing ownership uncertainty. Vanessa's office released another statement, smooth, polished, desperate. Cole Reimagine remains committed to transparency and innovation. Translation: we're drowning, but we'll smile while we sink. I didn't celebrate. Omar did. "She's finished," he said, leaning back in his chair. "In a week, that company will be a museum exhibit." "Maybe," I said. He looked at me strangely. "You don't seem happy." I shrugged. "Happy's a luxury. I built this to last, not to feel good." He studied me. "You ever wonder if she built this same thing for you once?" The question hit harder than it should have. "Once," I said finally. But she stopped reinforcing it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the half-lit office, my new headquarters, smaller but mine. The air smelled of dust and old coffee. Papers scattered across my desk like blueprints of unfinished thoughts. On one corner sat a folder of old photos, from the early days when Vanessa and I started the company in a rented warehouse in Brooklyn. There she was. Hair tied back, grease on her hands, standing beside me as we poured our first slab. We were broke then but happy, raw, naive. Convinced we could build the world with willpower and rebar. I turned the photo over. On the back, in her handwriting, was a line I'd forgotten: every empire starts with a shovel. I stared at it for a long time, then closed the folder. By Friday, the Board of Coal Reimagined voted to suspend Vanessa pending legal resolution. The public framed it as accountability. I knew better. It was abandonment. Omar came into my office mid-afternoon, shaking his head. "It's over. She's been ousted." I nodded. "You're not going to gloat?" "There's nothing left to gloat about." He frowned. "You sound like the loser." "Winning and losing are just labels," I said. "What matters is what still stands when the noise stops." At sunset, I went up to the roof. The city glowed below, orange fading into violet. The skyline looked like a forest of memories, every building a chapter of a life built on ambition and pride. I thought about Vanessa, alone in her penthouse, reading the headlines that once worshipped her and now carved her apart. For a second, a flicker of something, pity, maybe, cut through the satisfaction. But pity's dangerous. It softens the concrete before it sets. I exhaled slowly and whispered into the wind, "You told me to know my place. Turns out, it was under your empire. Holding the beams while you danced on top. Now the dance floor's gone." Later that night, I received an email from Vanessa. Short. No greeting. No signature. "You've proven your point. Now what?" I stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "Now I build again." I didn't send it. Instead, I deleted the draft, closed the laptop, and poured myself a drink. Because even I wasn't sure whether I was answering her question, or my own. She showed up on a Wednesday morning without calling first. No entourage, no publicist. No camera crew, just Vanessa standing in the lobby of CF Holdings in a black coat too heavy for the season. The receptionist's voice came through my intercom, tight with nerves. "Mr. Cole?" "Mrs. Cole, your ex-wife, is here to see you." "Send her up." When the elevator doors opened, I half expected the version of her that used to command boardrooms, heels sharp enough to puncture ego, smile rehearsed for profit. Instead, she looked smaller. Her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Nice office," she said, glancing around. "Smaller than I remember." "It fits what's left of me," I said. She gave a brittle laugh. "Always the poet." We sat across from each other at the glass table where I reviewed site blueprints. She stared at the drawings like she was trying to read my thoughts through concrete lines. "You've ruined me," she said finally. I didn't answer. She leaned forward. "Don't act innocent. You knew exactly what you were doing when you built that shadow company." "I built a safety net," I said. "You just jumped without checking it." Her jaw tightened. "You made me look like a thief." "You look like one," I said softly. "I didn't give you the costume." Her eyes flashed. "I built that brand beside you." Every contract, every investor was chasing my patents, I interrupted. "You were chasing applause." She stood abruptly and walked to the window. Below us, cranes swung like slow pendulums across the skyline. "Do you know what it's like to watch something you built collapse?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Every day." She turned back to me. "Then why couldn't you just let me have it? Why not start fresh instead of dragging me through mud?" "Because you tried to bury me there first." Silence stretched between us, thick as plaster. Finally she whispered, "You love the company more than you ever loved me." I met her eyes. That's not true. Isn't it? I loved what we were building. You just stopped building with me. For a long minute, the only sound was the hum of the HVAC and the distant clang of metal from a job site. Then she said quietly, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Neither did I. I wanted recognition. Not war. You declared it the moment you filed the motion to seize controlling interest, I said. You called it equalizing the partnership. That wasn't equality. That was demolition. Her voice cracked. You think I didn't feel cornered? Every investor looked at you. I was invisible in my own company. You weren't invisible, I said. You were impatient. She laughed bitterly. So your revenge is patience? Congratulations, Adrian. You win. I shook my head. It's not revenge anymore. Then what is it? Balance. She studied me carefully, as if searching for some remnant of the man she'd married. You're cold, she said finally. You've always been cold. Cold keeps things from cracking, I said. You taught me that heat ruins everything. For a moment she almost smiled, then it vanished. Do you ever feel guilty? Yes. I took a breath. But not for protecting what I built. For what we lost while I did it. She sat down again, slower this time. When they suspended me, I thought it was temporary. Now the board won't even return my calls. They say I'm radioactive. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Are you? Yes. But being sorry doesn't make it wrong. She looked at the drawings scattered across my table, new housing developments, sustainable infrastructure. Projects meant to rebuild communities instead of egos. What are these? New initiatives. Non-profit partnerships. You're turning saint now? No, I said. Just tired of building monuments to myself. Her voice softened. You were never meant for revenge, Adrian. You were meant for blueprints. Something in my chest shifted. An old fracture finally admitting pain. I said quietly, maybe. But revenge poured the concrete that purpose could stand on. She laughed once, not cruelly this time. Still quoting construction metaphors. It's the only language that never lies. She looked at me again, really looked, and for a moment the anger melted. In its place was something fragile, almost nostalgic. I miss the man who used to dream, she said. He's still here, I said. He just works alone now. When she left, she paused at the door. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, I said. It's too soon. But maybe someday. Maybe, I said. After the next building stands. She nodded once, eyes glassy but steady. Then she was gone. I stood there long after the elevator doors closed. Watching her reflection fade from the glass. Outside, the city kept moving, trucks, sirens, life continuing as if our war had been just weather. I pressed my palms to the window. The glass cool against my skin, and whispered, the foundations held, but the builders tired. That night, Omar found me still in the office. She came, didn't she, he said. She did. How'd it go? She apologized. He raised an eyebrow. And? I believed her. Omar sank into the chair opposite me. You think that's dangerous? Probably, I said. But so is pretending I don't still care. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you know. You could walk away now. Let her rebuild whatever pieces she has left. You've proven your point. Maybe, I said. But if I stop now, I'll never know whether this was justice or just pride. He smiled faintly. Sometimes they're the same thing. Yeah, I said. Until the dust settles. By the following month, the noise had faded, but not the echo. Coal Reimagined was effectively dead. The government contracts were reassigned. The board dissolved, and Vanessa's name was a whispered cautionary tale in business circles. On paper, I'd won. In practice, I'd built a fortress and locked myself inside. At first, I threw myself into work. CF Holdings was thriving. Clients who once sided with Vanessa came back quietly, pretending they'd never left. The industry moved on as if nothing had happened, except me. Meetings felt different now. People listened, but their eyes flickered with unease. As though they were watching a man who'd proven too sharp to trust completely. In one such meeting, a senior developer asked, "Mr. Cole, you have a reputation for creative control. How much oversight will CF Holdings retain in this partnership?" "Complete oversight," I said. He forced a polite smile. "Of course. They signed the deal anyway." But I caught the look he gave his assistant on the way out, the look of someone doing business with a necessary monster. That night, I drove to the river. The skyline shimmered across the water like fractured glass. It hit me then, the same calm that had once been power now felt like distance. I'd built so many walls, legal, emotional, psychological, that I couldn't see where the battle had ended and the barricade began. I remembered something Vanessa had said during our last argument before the divorce. "You don't want a wife, Adrian. You want a witness." Back then, I'd called it melodrama. Now, standing by the water, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, Omar came into my office holding a letter. "From the city board," he said. "They're declining our bid on the Central Park redevelopment." "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "Unofficially? You're politically radioactive. They don't want bad press." I leaned back in my chair. "Bad press? For winning a lawsuit?" "For winning too cleanly," he said. "People don't like stories where one side walks away untouched." I exhaled slowly. "You mean they don't like when the villain loses gracefully?" "Exactly," Omar said. "The narrative doesn't sell." Later that day, I had lunch with Miller. He looked tired, older than I remembered. "You know, Adrian," he said between bites. "I've represented clients who've done worse things for less reason. But none of them looked this miserable afterward." "I'm not miserable." "You're lying." I smiled faintly. "Lawyers shouldn't call their clients liars." He leaned forward. "Friends can." I looked out the window. People hurried past, oblivious. "Do you ever think some victories are too quiet?" I asked. He frowned. "Quiet isn't bad. It is when it echoes," I said. That night, I went home and found a thick envelope waiting by my door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of an article, "The Rise and Fall of Vanessa Cole, When Power Meets Pride." Beneath it, in red ink, someone had underlined a sentence, "Sources close to the former CEO say she's considering leaving the country to start over." I stared at it for a long time. Leaving. Starting over. For months I'd fantasized about her exile, her disappearance from the skyline that had once been ours. But now, the thought of her vanishing completely felt wrong. Like erasing the first draft of a blueprint that still taught you something. Days turned into weeks. My schedule filled with board meetings, contract reviews, charity requests. I signed papers, approved budgets, smiled for cameras. Everything looked perfect again. But I couldn't shake the sense that I'd traded something real for something immaculate. One evening, Omar caught me staring at the city from the balcony. "You ever stop to think maybe you built the perfect company but forgot to build a life?" he asked. "Every day," I said. "So what now?" I looked at him. "Maybe I start over too." "With her?" I shook my head. "No. With myself." That weekend, I visited the first construction site we ever worked on, a public library in Queens. The building still stood, solid and quiet. I ran my hand along the cool stone of the entrance. The plaque still bore our names side by side, designed and constructed by Adrian and Vanessa Cole, 2010. I remember the day we finished it. We'd been covered in dust and laughter, arguing about whether the foundation could hold another wing. She'd said, "You always build like you're afraid the world will end tomorrow." I'd said, "Because one day it will." Standing there now, I realized she'd been right about something. I had built like a man afraid. Afraid of loss. Afraid of weakness. Afraid that if I stopped building, I'd vanish. That night, I went home and pulled out an old sketchbook. The first page was filled with rough pencil lines, the early drafts of our first office layout. My handwriting scrawled across the margin, efficiency before beauty. I turned the page and began sketching again, not buildings this time, but spaces for people. Community centers. Parks. Schools. Projects that wouldn't carry my name. For the first time in years, I felt my hands tremble, not with anger, but with purpose. The next morning, I called Omar. "Find me the contact for the City Housing Initiative," I said. He sounded confused. "You want another government contract?" "No. I want to build something no one can take." As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the office glass. Same suit. Same eyes. Same stillness. But for the first time since the courtroom, I saw something behind that calm, not arrogance, not bitterness. Resolve. Peace, maybe. The kind you only get after realizing that revenge is just demolition wearing pride as perfume. The first day I visited the City Housing Initiative. The air smelled of wet soil and sawdust, honest smells, unpolished by corporate air fresheners. Rows of half-framed townhouses stretched across the lot like ribs in an unfinished skeleton. Children rode bikes through puddles while volunteers in hard hats shouted measurements over the hum of drills. It felt alive in a way my glass tower offices never had. A coordinator in a neon vest jogged up. "Mr. Cole? We didn't expect you till next week." "I got tired of meetings," I said. "Thought I'd start with dirt instead of PowerPoints." He laughed, handed me a clipboard, and introduced the site's lead designer, a young woman in dusty boots and a ponytail. Balancing a roll of blueprints under one arm. "Talia Rivera," she said, shaking my hand. "I grew up 2 blocks from here. You're the famous concrete guy. Right?" "Fame's just noise that dries slow," I said. "Show me what you're building." She led me through a maze of scaffolding and half-set walls. Her plans were ambitious, low-cost modular homes with solar panels, adaptive materials, gardens between every unit. "It's not glamorous," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But it's solid." "That's the point," I said. "Glamour collapses faster than brick." She grinned. "You sound like my dad. Smart man. He drove cement trucks. Even smarter." Over the next week I kept coming back, unofficially at first. I carried lumber. Checked rebar spacing, listened. Talia never treated me like a celebrity of failure, she treated me like another pair of hands. One afternoon she caught me sketching adjustments on a scrap of plywood. "Your lines are clean," she said. "They used to pay me for that," I replied. "They still could." "Why are you here, really?" I paused, then said, "To remember why I started." Word spread that Adrian Cole was volunteering on site. At first, people came just to take pictures. Then they started asking questions: how to pour evenly, how to test soil, how to read the weather before a storm. And I found myself teaching again. It was strange, the way instruction softened me. Every time I explained a load path or a curing schedule, the noise in my head quieted a little more. One evening after everyone left, Talia and I sat on a stack of drywall watching the sunset bleed across the skyline. "Is it weird," she asked, "building for free after running a billion-dollar company?" "Not weird," I said. "Just lighter." She studied me. "You ever miss it? The suits. The cameras, the boardrooms?" "I missed the part before all that," I said. When concrete still smelled new and nothing was political. She nodded slowly. My mom says peace costs pride. She's right, I said. I overpaid for the wrong one. Weeks turned into months. The first units went up, small, sturdy, sun-washed. I started mentoring some of the interns, mostly kids from rough neighborhoods who thought architecture was a word for rich people. I taught them measurements and patience. How to check a line twice before cutting once, how to listen to silence before a pour. One boy, Mateo, asked, "Why do you care so much about the base?" No one sees it. That's exactly why, I said. What you hide decides whether what you show survives. He nodded. And I saw in his eyes the same spark I'd had at 19. That night I got a call from Omar. Guess who just gave a public interview, he said. I didn't have to guess. Vanessa. First one in months. Said she's leaving corporate life. Wants to focus on philanthropy. I laughed softly. She's allergic to humility. It'll kill her. Maybe not, Omar said. She mentioned your project. Called it a noble idea. That stopped me. Really? Verbatim. Maybe she's changing too. I looked out over the construction site, lights glowing like tiny stars across the frame of a half-finished house. Maybe we both are, I said. The following weekend, Talia found me sitting alone under the skeletal roof of the community center. Blueprints spread across my lap, coffee gone cold. You look haunted, she said. Thinking about her? About everything. She sat beside me. Want to talk about it? I shook my head. Not tonight. Then listen, she said gently. You taught me that strength isn't in the walls. It's in the people who stand inside them. So maybe stop measuring what you lost and start living in what you built. I turned to her. You sound like a foreman who's read philosophy. She smiled. You sound like a man still learning to forgive. When I drove home later, the radio played some late-night jazz, soft, imperfect, human. For the first time in years. I didn't change the station. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the window. Same face. Different weight behind the eyes. The kind of calm that doesn't come from winning, but from understanding. The next morning, I arrived early to the site before anyone else. The air was crisp, the city still half asleep. I walked through the half-built homes, touching beams, testing bolts, whispering measurements under my breath. Each sound echoed like prayer. In one of the rooms, sunlight fell through the open roof, hitting the concrete floor in a perfect square. I stood inside it. Hands in pockets, breathing dust and hope. This, I said aloud, is what foundations are for. And for the first time since the gavel, the words didn't taste like revenge. They tasted like peace setting firm. The project hit the news by accident. A local paper ran a small feature titled "Former Tycoon Builds Affordable Housing for His Old City." They photographed me standing beside Talia. Both of us covered in dust and smiling awkwardly. By morning, every outlet had picked it up. Suddenly I was no longer the man who lost his empire. I was the man who rebuilt one for others. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same cameras that once waited for my downfall were now fighting for interviews about redemption. I refused them all. But the world had a way of pulling ghosts out of silence. 3 days later, Vanessa gave her first national interview in nearly a year. The host introduced her with polite reverence, Vanessa Cole, entrepreneur, former CEO, and now philanthropist. She looked older. Softer. Still beautiful. But the armor was gone. Her tone wasn't sharp, it was quiet, deliberate. I've made mistakes, she said. Public ones. But I believe people can rebuild. When the host asked about me, she hesitated. Adrian's doing something I should have done sooner. He's building for purpose. Not pride. The clip went viral. Half the internet thought she was trying to manipulate me again. The other half called it grace. I just turned off the television and stared at the black screen. The next day, Talia approached me on site, waving her phone. She mentioned you. Everyone's talking about this. I'm aware. You're not going to respond? No need. She sounded sincere, Talia said carefully. Sincerity's free, I said. Actions cost. She frowned. You still hate her? No, I said. Hate's too heavy to carry on good ground. That night, I found an email waiting in my inbox. No subject line. Just, I saw the houses. They're beautiful. I stared at it for a long time, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, they're not mine. They belong to everyone who builds them. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. For days, no reply came. But somehow the silence felt different this time, not empty, but complete. Shaped 2 weeks later, the mayor's office invited me to an awards dinner to honor the project. I didn't want to go. Omar insisted. You can't keep hiding from the world, he said. I'm not hiding, I said. I'm working, same thing when you don't come up for air. The event was a blur of polite handshakes and small talk. I endured it the way you endure bad weather, knowing it would pass if you kept your coat on. But near the end of the night, a familiar voice stopped me cold. Adrian. Vanessa stood there, wearing black again, hair tied back simply, no diamonds, no entourage. Just her. I didn't move. Neither did she. For a second, it felt like the entire ballroom had gone silent. She said, I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I said. Your speech was good. I didn't give one. That's what made it good. We stepped out onto the balcony, away from the cameras. The city lights shimmered below. The skyline she once ruled and I once built. She took a deep breath. I wanted to thank you. For what? For not answering the interview. For letting me say what I needed to without turning it into another war. I'm tired of wars. She nodded. So am I. We stood in silence. For the first time in years, it wasn't uncomfortable. Just human. I'm leaving the city, she said finally. Selling the penthouse. I'm moving near the coast. Running away? Starting over, she said. You should try it sometime. I smiled faintly. Maybe I already did. She looked out at the skyline. Do you ever regret how we ended? I thought about it. Every day. But not for the reasons you think. What reasons then? Because we wasted so much time proving who could build higher instead of asking if the ground was solid. Her eyes glistened. Maybe we both forgot to check the soil. Maybe, I said. She turned to face me fully. Adrian. I didn't mean for any of this to destroy you. It didn't. Her brow furrowed. Then what did it do? It showed me who I was building for. She exhaled. Slow and unsteady. And who's that now? I looked past her, at the skyline, at the cranes still glowing like fireflies in the distance. Anyone who needs a place to stand. For a moment she looked at me like she used to, before the ambition, before the lawyers, before the fall. Then she smiled, faintly. I think I finally understand you. You were always capable, I said. You just read the wrong blueprints. She laughed softly. You still talk in metaphors. They're cheaper than therapy. When the night ended, we didn't promise to stay in touch. We didn't hug or exchange numbers. We just nodded. An unspoken truce poured into place. As I watched her walk away, I felt no triumph, no anger, no regret, just stillness. The kind that comes when the last wall finally settles. The next morning, Talia asked how the dinner went. Quiet, I said. That's rare for you. I think quiet's what I was building toward all along. She smiled. Then maybe the foundation's finally set. That afternoon, I returned to the site. The last row of homes was nearly complete. Children were already playing in the park that hadn't even been landscaped yet. I stood by the fence, listening to their laughter echo against the half-finished walls. And I thought, this is what peace sounds like when it's done curing. Winter came early that year. The air on the site turned sharp, the ground cold and stubborn. But the houses were finished, rows of clean lines and soft colors, standing proud against the gray sky. Families had already started moving in. The laughter of children replaced the grind of drills. For once, the city didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home. I'd agreed to stay on as an advisor for the next phase of the project: mentorship programs, apprenticeships, skill workshops. Talia insisted that if I left now, the kids will think foundations pour themselves. So I stayed. The first batch of trainees were rough but eager: electricians, carpenters, engineers, some fresh out of high school, some fresh out of bad luck. They didn't know my history. Not really. To them, I was just Mr. Cole, the guy who could tell a bad joint by the sound of a hammer strike. One day, a kid named Mateo asked, "Is it true you used to own skyscrapers?" I smiled. "I built them, yes. Owning's overrated." He frowned. "Why'd you stop?" "Because I finally figured out what I was supposed to build." He thought about that for a while, then nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. On weekends, Talia and I met to review progress reports. Her designs were bold, clean, and full of hope, everything mine used to be before ego poured over them like asphalt. "You know," she said once, tapping a blueprint, "you could take credit for this whole initiative. The press loves a redemption arc." "I already got my headlines," I said. "They just didn't age well." She laughed. "Then what are you after now?" "Stability," I said. And silence. In February, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small painting acrylic on canvas, the kind you find in coastal shops. It showed a pier under a pale sunrise. The brush strokes were hesitant but deliberate, like someone learning to trust their hand again. A note was taped to the back. "Adrian, I thought you might like this view. It's where I wake up every morning now. The tide's predictable here. Peaceful. I'm learning to paint, though the sea refuses to hold still. I wanted to say thank you, not for what you did, but for what you stopped doing. You let me fall far enough to find solid ground. Maybe you were right all along, the foundation matters more than the frame." I read it twice, then set it on my desk beside a photograph of our first construction site from decades ago. Two versions of us, staring back, one covered in dust, the other washed clean by time. That night, I went back to the river. The bridge glittered under the streetlights, its reflection stretching like gold thread across the water. I remembered standing there after the divorce, when victory had felt like vengeance and peace seemed impossible. Now, years later, the water sounded different, less like chaos, more like rhythm. I whispered into the cold air, "We finally built something that lasted." And I meant it. The next morning, Omar stopped by my office with 2 coffees. "Heard from her?" I nodded toward the painting. "She's by the coast." He studied it. "Peaceful. That's the point." He took a sip, then said, "You ever gonna visit?" "Maybe someday." "You think she'd want that?" "I don't know," I said. "But for the first time, I don't need to." He smiled. "So what's next?" I looked out at the skyline through the frosted glass. "We keep building. Just slower this time." Later that week, Talia brought a group of students from a local college to tour the site. I watched her explain soil compaction and drainage with the same confidence I used to bring to board meetings. The students listened, wide-eyed, jotting notes. When she finished, she called me over. "This is the man who started all this." I raised a hand modestly. "Don't let her fool you. I just kept the concrete from cracking." One of the students asked, What's the secret to building something that lasts? Everyone turned to me. I thought about the question longer than I needed to. Patience, I said finally. And forgiveness. Especially for yourself. The room went quiet. Then one of the students whispered, "That's going on a t-shirt." Talia laughed. "He's full of those." That evening, as I locked up, I noticed a small plaque newly installed on the community center's entrance. I hadn't authorized it. It read, "In honor of those who build foundations strong enough for second chances." I didn't know who ordered it, but I didn't remove it either. That night, I sat in my apartment, the painting from Vanessa leaning against the wall beside my drafting table. I'd started sketching again, not skyscrapers, but open spaces, courtyards, gardens, places for people to breathe. Halfway through the sketch, I realized something simple: the peace I'd been chasing wasn't something you win. It's something you learn to live in. And as the city lights flickered outside, I whispered the same words I'd once said in that courtroom. Though this time they meant something entirely different: concrete cracks under pressure, people shouldn't. I smiled. Because for the first time, I wasn't quoting revenge. I was quoting forgiveness. 5 years passed. The world moved on. New companies rose, old ones fell, and somewhere between them, CF Holdings became a name whispered with respect again, not because of wealth, but because it outlived scandal. I'd long since stepped down. Talia ran the company now. Sharper than ever, turning it into something I could be proud of. I still visited the sites sometimes, but mostly I lived quietly near the coast. The ocean has a way of humbling men who once built towers. My mornings were simple: coffee, long walks by the pier, sketches that never needed to become buildings. Some days I'd drive into town for groceries or wander through the art gallery by the harbor. It wasn't much, but it was peace. And then, one morning, I saw her again. The gallery had changed hands since Vanessa's passing. I hadn't known when it happened, Omar told me months later, gently, over the phone. I'd sent flowers but couldn't bring myself to visit. Until now. Inside, the air smelled of salt and oil paint. The walls were filled with her work, the seascapes, the bridges, the light. A plaque near the entrance read, "The Vanessa Cole Memorial Collection." She learned to build again, this time, with color. I walked slowly through the space. Each canvas felt like a conversation unfinished, brushstrokes that said what words never could. Near the back, a painting caught my eye. A bridge stretching from a city skyline into open water, the horizon glowing like sunrise. At the bottom corner, and, faintly below it, scratched into the paint in pencil, I exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. She'd kept our first design. The same sketch we'd drawn together years before. Outside, the sky was pale blue and endless. I sat on the bench overlooking the water, 2 chairs bolted to the pier, both facing the horizon. The ocean murmured beneath, waves folding over themselves like memory. I closed my eyes and let the wind sting my face. For the first time in years, the noise in my head was gone. No courtrooms, no contracts, no echoes of loss. Just the steady rhythm of something bigger than ambition. Later that afternoon, I met the gallery curator, a young woman named Elise. "You must be Mr. Cole," she said warmly. She mentioned you often in her notes. Notes? She led me to a back room stacked with canvases and journals. She handed me a worn notebook, pages yellowed with salt air. The first line on the first page stopped me cold. "Adrian once told me that revenge builds walls and purpose builds bridges." I used to laugh at that. Now I paint both, trying to learn the difference. The entries that followed were small, fragmented reflections, about art, failure, forgiveness. One page read, "He'll never know that his silence taught me more than his words ever did." Another, "If he ever finds peace, I hope it feels like the tide, constant, forgiving, inevitable." I closed the journal and whispered, "It does, Vanessa. It does." That evening, I walked along the beach until the sky bruised purple. I carried one of her small paintings with me, the pier under the morning light. I placed it gently at the edge of the surf, letting the waves kiss the frame before I stepped back. I kept the foundation, I said softly. You built the view. The tide rolled in, touched the wood, and carried a shimmer of foam across the sand. It felt like an answer. A few months later, the city invited me to give a lecture at the new Urban Renewal Conference. I almost declined, but Talia insisted. It's not about you, she said. It's about what you built for others. So I went. Standing before a hall of young architects and engineers, I saw the same hunger I once carried. They expected success stories, formulas, strategies. Instead, I told them the truth. I spent half my life building higher, I said. The other half learning that strength isn't height, it's stability. I lost everything once because I confused legacy with ego. Don't make the same mistake. Someone asked from the back, what do you build for now? I smiled. Peace. There was a pause, then applause, not thunderous, but real. That night, after the event, I sat by the window of my hotel room overlooking the city. The skyline glittered like it always had. But it no longer looked like something I needed to conquer. It just looked alive. Omar called to check in. You did good, old man, he said. I just told the truth. Which part? That the second contract was never the revenge. It was the blueprint for who I became after. He chuckled. You sound like a poet again. Maybe that's what happens when the concrete finally cures. The next morning, I walked one last time through the old business district. The sign outside the former Coal Foundations building was gone, replaced by something new, something younger. I smiled. The world keeps building. That's what it's supposed to do. As I passed the construction site, a young foreman called out, Mr. Cole. We're using your old designs for the base reinforcement. I waved. Make sure it's level. He laughed. Always is. And in that moment, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a builder who finally trusted the hands that came after him. When I returned to the coast, the sea was calm again. The same two chairs faced the water, one painted blue, one left bare. I sat in the empty one and placed the journal on the other. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky the color of copper. I whispered. You took my company, Vanessa, but you gave me back my soul. A breeze rolled across the pier, cool and forgiving. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried, one sharp sound against the endless hush of waves. I closed my eyes, letting the sound settle deep. This, I realized, was what it meant to know my place. Not in the corner office. Not in the courtroom. But here, beside the sea, beside forgiveness. Beside the silence that finally held.